They gave us an ultimatum. We gave them a choice. Admiral Valerius Kane stood on the command deck of the TFS Vanguard, his reflection a ghost in the armored starfield viewport. Before him hung the planet Viridia, a swirl of viridian green and brilliant sapphire under the gentle light of its star. Around it, like sharks circling a bleeding swimmer, hung the ships of the Caithar hegemony. They were knives of obsidian and malevolent crimson, outnumbering his expeditionary fleet 3-1 and outgunning it by more. At the center of the main tactical display, a number burned with quiet intensity. Sandra 5842. The hegemony's mercy had a deadline. His fleet-mind Lyceum spoke in the calm, synthesized tones that had been Kane's anchor for a decade. Executor Vorlag repeats his terms, Admiral. Unconditional surrender of the Viridian colony. Cession of all system resources. Your fleet will disarm and await Caithar adjudication. The unspoken alternative hung in the recycled air of the bridge planetary bombardment until the green turned to glass. He's not a negotiator, Lyceum. He's a functionary with a doctrine. Kane set his voice a low rumble that cut through the bridge's hum. He turned to face his tactical officer commander Eva Rostova, whose gaze was locked on the enemy disposition. What's their posture? Eva, a classic cage formation, sir. She replied, her fingers dancing over her console, highlighting threat vectors in sharp amber. Overlapping fields of fire concentrated on the planet and the primary jump points. They expect us to run or to fight head-on. Their doctrine is their weakness. It makes them predictable. They believe their strength makes them infallible. Kane nodded, the faint vibration of the ship's inertial dampeners, a constant presence under his feet. The hegemony had rolled over a dozen nascent stellar nations this way, issuing ultimatums from a position of overwhelming force and crushing any who resisted. They called it imposed harmony, a grim euphemism for conquest. Humanity called it tyranny. The Terran Mandate had dispatched the Vanguard fleet, not to win a war, but to prevent one, to teach a lesson that could not be ignored. Open a channel to the colony governor, Kane ordered. Let's remind ourselves precisely what we're fighting for. A moment later, the weary face of Governor Eris Thorne appeared on a secondary screen, the lines of stress carved deep around his eyes. Behind him, Kane could see the organized calm of a planetary command bunker. Children's drawings were taped to a bulkhead, colorful scrawls of friendly ships and smiling stars. They were a stark contrast to the cold reality hanging in orbit. Admiral Thorne began, his voice strained but steady. We saw your fleet arrive. The children think you're angels. We're holding firm, but the fear is palpable. We are not angels, Governor. We are guardians, Kane corrected gently. And we do not break. What is your status on civilian shelters and supply distribution? Shelters are at 98% capacity. Food and water are stable, but medical isotopes for the infirmaries will run critical in about 48 hours. We have a convoy of freighters that were caught outside the blockade. They're holding at the system's edge, loaded with what we need. Kane's eyes met Rostova's. That convoy was their first move, the linchpin of their opening gambit. We see them, Governor. Hold the line. We are coming. He cut the channel. The governor's determined face dissolving into the tactical display. The countdown timer now read Symphu 16. Every second was a resource they couldn't afford to waste. We will hold the line, Lyceum Kane said, turning his attention to the core of his plan. Run the latest projection for Operation Mirror Shade. I want to see the failure probabilities after the hegemony's final deployment. Calculating, the AI responded instantly. A three-dimensional model of the system bloomed in the center of the bridge. Red icons represented the Caithar fleet, blue for the Vanguard. The hegemony's tighter picket formation increases particle beam saturation in the primary corridor. Probability of at least one freighter loss is now 63%. Probability of catastrophic mission failure stands at 41%. Chief Ben Carter, a man whose worry lines were a permanent fixture, spoke up from his station. Admiral, pushing those civilian freighters into a 63% loss scenario is a hard sell. They're volunteers, not naval crew. The heat budget for the escort frigates is already razor thin. The numbers assume a direct confrontation. Ben Kane countered, his gaze fixed on the simulation. The hegemony expects us to value their assets as they value ours as disposable tools. That is the assumption we will exploit. He gestured to a nearly empty stretch of space on the map. Eva begins spooling up the drone swarms. It's time to show the Executor a reflection he won't recognize. Their rigidity will be their undoing. A young ensign sat at a monitoring station in the Vanguard's aft sensor bay, her focus on the deep system telemetry. She was cataloging gravitational anomalies in the sprawling asteroid belt that marked the system's outer edge. Her console pinged softly, flagging a faint, intermittent energy signature. It was almost certainly a ghost, a sensor echo from a rogue metallic asteroid tumbling in the void. She logged it as such a minor curiosity in a sea of overwhelming threats, and turned her attention back to the enemy fleet, deep in the belly of the frigate. TFS Steadfast Chief Engineer Anya Sharma braced her hand against a coolant pipe, its gentle thrum a familiar heartbeat. Her team was running the final checks on the drone launchers. These weren't weaponized drones. They were something far more subtle. Each one was a sophisticated energy mirror, capable of absorbing, storing, and redirecting vast amounts of energy. Deployed together, they would form a lattice of pure deception. All cells are green, Chief Technician called out. Lattice sync is nominal. Anya nodded, the recycled air tasting of ozone and hot metal. Let's get our ghosts ready for the show. On the Vanguard's bridge, the decision was made. Lyceum signaled a convoy to begin their burn. Kane commanded. Commander Rostova, deploy the mirror lattice on my mark. Ben, monitor their sensor activity. I want to know the second they take the bait. The stage is set. The first act begins. The civilian freighters, bulky and slow, began their ponderous acceleration toward the blockade. They were lambs moving toward wolves, a sight designed to trigger the hegemony's predatory instincts. On the tactical plot, Kane saw the Kithar ships adjust their vectors almost immediately, their sensor arrays flaring as they focused on the easy targets. They saw a desperate, foolish attempt to run the blockade. They saw exactly what Kane wanted them to see. They're pinging the lead freighter with targeting scanners, Carter reported, his voice tight. Multiple locks. They are hailing it. Executor Vorlog's face appeared on the main screen, a vision of reptilian arrogance. His species was tall and gaunt, with skin like polished obsidian and eyes that burned with cold fire. Terran Admiral. His voice was a grating hiss translated by the ship's computer. Your desperate gambit is noted. This is your only warning. Order your civilian vessels to stand down, or we will make an example of them. Your defiance has a cost. Everything has a cost. Executor Kane replied, his voice calm and even. The contrast was deliberate. You are the one who has forgotten how to calculate it. Kane looked at Rostova. Mark. Lattice away, she confirmed. They cannot see the trap for the bait. From the hulls of Kane's warships, thousands of drones no larger than a human hand silently ejected into the void. They sped toward a pre-calculated corridor, a blind spot in the hegemony's sensor net. They were ghosts invisible until activated. The freighters continued their burn, a brave and foolish charge into the jaws of the beast. The console glare reflected in Carter's wide eyes as he monitored the enemy's response. "Executor is giving the order to fire," Carter announced, a tremor in his voice. "A demonstration shot. He's targeting the lead freighter's engines." "Let him," Kane said, his knuckles white, where he gripped the command lectern. The ship remained silent, every soul on the bridge holding their breath. A searing lance of crimson energy leaped from the nearest Cathar destroyer. It crossed the distance in a heartbeat, a message of absolute power. But just before it reached its target, the void itself seemed to flash. The mirror lattice came alive. For a nanosecond, the drones shimmered into existence, their surfaces catching the energy beam, absorbing it, and vanishing back into stealth. The beam never arrived. The freighter sailed on untouched. On the Hegemony Bridge, there must have been chaos. A weapon that fired and simply vanished into nothing was a physical impossibility. He fired again. Carter said, a note of awe in his tone. "Same result. Sir, they're lighting up the entire sector with active scans. They're blind. They're trying to find what just happened." Now, Kane commanded, "Full burn. Get that convoy through." "We have opened the door." While the Hegemony fleet was distracted, firing blindly into the space where their shots disappeared, the Terran frigates escorting the convoy ignited their main drives. They moved through a different corridor, one now cloaked by the electronic noise of the Hegemony's own frantic scanning. The mirror lattice was more than a shield. It was a smokescreen, a masterpiece of misdirection. It didn't just stop the beams. It created phantom energy signatures, ghost ships that flickered on and off the Cathar displays. The Hegemony, utterly confounded, divided their fire. They shot at echoes. They targeted sensor ghosts. Their perfect cage had become a hall of mirrors, and they were trapped inside it with their own confusion. The timer on the main screen ticked past 68 Dododors. "Convoy is halfway through the engagement zone," Rostova reported, her voice a whip crack of efficiency. "Hegemony destroyers are repositioning to intercept, but their firing solutions are a mess." The scent of stressed circuitry filled the air, a testament to the immense processing power Lyceum was dedicating to managing the lattice. "The Executor is adapting Lyceum," noted its voice devoid of emotion. "He is ordering his ships to switch to mass driver projectiles. He is bypassing the energy reflection problem." Kane had anticipated this. "The lattice can't stop rocks." "Benan, how long until the convoy is clear?" 6 minutes, Admiral." "Too long. They are learning. We must teach faster." The civilian ships were too slow. Kinetic rounds were archaic but effective. The first volley of projectiles tore through the void. They were unguided, a shotgun blast of tungsten and iron aimed at a wide section of space. One of the freighters, the Starlight Wanderer, shuddered as a slug ripped through its unarmored cargo bay. Alarms flared across the tactical plot. "Starlight Wanderer is hit," Carter yelled. "Venting atmosphere. Main drive is offline. The cost of victory." Kane felt it like a physical blow. He watched the freighter tumble, a wounded bird in a sky full of predators. His escort frigates. The Steadfast and the Iron Duke broke formation immediately. They weren't trying to run anymore. They moved to shield the crippled vessel, their smaller, more agile hulls, absorbing the next volley of kinetic strikes. Armor plating glowed cherry red from the impacts. "Order the Wanderer's crew to abandon ship." Kane said, his voice hard as iron. "The other freighters are not to stop. They must complete the run." His own moral line was being tested. Sacrifice one for the many. It was a cold, hard piece of command calculus. Lyceum's voice cut through the tension. Admiral, a recommendation. The mirror lattice has absorbed a significant energy charge from the hegemony's initial volleys. It can be repurposed. For what a targeted energy release. We can focus the stored energy into a single, high-intensity pulse. A sun stare. It would not destroy their ships, but it would overload the optical sensors on every vessel focused on this quadrant. It would blind them completely for several crucial seconds. They gave us fire, we will return the light. The risk was enormous. A discharge of that magnitude could cascade, frying the lattice drones themselves. It was a one-shot weapon. The probability of lattice collapse, Kane asked. 32%, Lyceum stated. But the probability of saving the Wanderer's crew and the convoy is 89% if the maneuver is successful. Kane didn't hesitate. He was not a man who sacrificed his people if a better option, however risky, presented itself. Do it, Lyceum. All channels broadcast this on open frequencies. Let them and anyone else listening know what happens when you corner something with nothing left to lose. Aye, Admiral. The space between the fleets shimmered. The thousands of tiny invisible drones focused the stolen energy of the hegemony into a single point. For a brief, terrifying moment, a new star was born in the Kepler 186F system. An impossibly bright lance of pure white light erupted from the empty void, striking not the ships, but the space just in front of them. It was a flashbang on a stellar scale. Every sensor, every viewport on the Kethar vessels that was pointed in that direction was instantly, brutally overloaded. The universe now watches our ledger. On the bridge of the Vanguard, the crew shielded their eyes against the glare on the monitors. When the light faded, the tactical situation had changed completely. The hegemony fleet was in disarray. Their ships were drifting, firing randomly, their precision cage utterly broken. The two escort frigates had used those precious seconds of blindness to attach tow cables to the Starlight Wanderer, pulling it along as the rest of the convoy raced into the safety of Viridia's orbital space. The cost was tallied. The Steadfast reported multiple hull breaches and casualties, 3 dead, a dozen wounded. The Starlight Wanderer was crippled, a total loss of hull, but for the crew section. But the convoy was through. The medical isotopes, the food, the hope, it had all reached the colony. The hegemony's ultimatum had been defied. The timer read C12:04. Kane allowed himself a single sharp exhale. They had won the first exchange, but he knew this was only the beginning. He had surprised the Executor. He had shown him a new kind of warfare. But the hegemony did not learn from surprise. They punished it. Lyceum Kane said, his voice resonating with newfound steel. That anomalous energy signature in the asteroid belt, the one we logged as a sensor ghost. Retask. Every spare sensor we have. I want to know what it is. Now. A new board lit up on the main screen, data streams pouring in from the deep system arrays. The ensign who had first noticed it now worked with a feverish intensity. The ghost was real. And after the sun stare pulse, its energy output had changed. It was no longer passive. It was active. It was watching them. They were not alone in this test. Admiral Lyceum's voice was different now. A subtle shift in inflection that Kane had learned to recognize as surprise, or the closest an AI could come to it. The signal is not a natural phenomenon. It is a tightly focused quantum entanglement communicator, highly advanced, far beyond the hegemony's known capabilities. Who are they talking to? Kane asked, a cold dread seeping into him. Unknown. The encryption is layered in a fractal matrix. However, I have intercepted a burst transmission from the Executor's flagship. It was sent moments after his fleet was blinded. It was directed at the signal source. Rostova looked up from her console, her face pale. Sir, What if the fleet isn't the real threat? What if they're just the instrument? It was a chilling thought. The hegemony was a known quantity. Their doctrine was brutal, but understandable. This was something else, a mystery seated in the darkness at the edge of the system. The countdown timer was no longer just a measure of the hegemony's patience. It was a measure of how long Kane had to solve a much larger and much more dangerous puzzle. The account is larger than we knew. Kane walked to the viewport, staring past the victorious but wounded ships of his fleet toward the distant dark ribbon of the asteroid belt. The hegemony had built a cage, but what if that cage was also part of a test? And what if the real judge was still waiting in the wings? This fleet, he reminded himself, teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars. Their doctrine was one of liberation through knowledge, not subjugation, through force. Bentibent, get me a damage report from the Steadfast. I want to talk to the engineer who patched their life support, Kane said, turning back to the bridge. Eva, begin planning for a full system sweep. Lyceum, dedicate 40% of your processing power to breaking that encryption. I don't care what it takes. The bridge crew moved with renewed purpose. They had a victory, but there was no celebration. There was only the work. The steady, relentless human work of standing against the dark. The timer continued its silent, inexorable countdown. Chapter 21. The game had changed. The board was larger, and new pieces were in play. We will balance this equation. On Viridia, the supplies were being unloaded. In the infirmaries, doctors were preparing the life-saving isotopes. A small child in a planetary shelter picked up a crayon and drew a new picture, a brilliant white star driving away the dark, angular ships. She didn't understand the strategy, the risk, or the sacrifice. She only understood that for a moment, the angels had won. The stakes were clearer than ever. Executor Vorlog, on the bridge of his flagship, Indomitable Will, stared at his tactical display. The ghost images were gone, but the humiliation remained. His sensors were slowly coming back online, but his authority had been grievously wounded. He had followed the doctrine. He had demonstrated power. He had been made a fool of. A red light blinked on his private console, a message from the proctor waiting in the asteroid belt. The message contained a single character, a mark of disapproval. Vorlog's hands clenched. The Terrans did not fight with honor. They fought with tricks and light like cowards. He would not be deceived again. He opened a fleet-wide channel. All ships, he hissed, his voice venomous. Tighten the blockade. Nothing gets in or out. Launch the orbital mines. Surround the planet in a wall of steel and fire. Let them watch as their hope is strangled. His fleet moved. This was not the precise cage-like formation from before. This was a fist clenching around Viridia. Raw brute force. No subtlety, no doctrine, but pure, overwhelming strength. They have abandoned their script. Kane watched the hegemony's movements, a grim smile touching his lips. He's angry, he murmured. He's lost his composure. He's defaulting to blunt force. This new formation is far more dangerous, Admiral Rostova warned. They are forming a shell, a brute force kinetic barrier. Our mirror tricks won't work against that. They're locking the system down completely. I know, Kane said. And in doing so, he has given us the entire rest of the system to play in. He thinks the prize is the planet. Kane tapped the tactical map, indicating the vast empty spaces between the system's gas giants and the asteroid belt. The real prize is the choice we are about to offer him. A new plan began to form in his mind, audacious and terrifying in its scope. It was no longer about breaking a blockade. It was about turning the entire solar system into a weapon, a demonstration so profound that it would be recorded in every ledger from Earth to the galactic core. A lesson in the true cost of an ultimatum. Lyceum's synthesized voice was a soft counterpoint to the Admiral's thoughts. Sir, I am beginning to isolate a recursive element in the Proctor's encryption. It appears to be a public key, but one that authenticates on a galactic network. It is a broadcast channel. They are not just communicating, they are reporting. The Proctor is performing an audit. The pieces clicked into place. The blockade. The ultimatum, Kane's response. It was all being watched, recorded, and judged by some unknown third party. This wasn't a battle for a colony. It was a performance. Then we shall give them a finale they will never forget. Eva Kane set his eyes alight with a fire the executor would have recognized as righteousness. Plot a course for the gas giant Kronos. Use the gravity well for a slingshot maneuver. Ben, I want every drone, every spare part, every bit of scrap metal we can find, loaded into cargo pods. We're going to build something. Build what? Sir Carter asked. His brow furrowed in confusion. A mirror, Kane said. Not a small one this time. A mirror so large it will reflect not just a beam of light, but the very doctrine of the hegemony back onto itself. Lyceum, what is the precise energy output of Viridia's star? The AI answered instantly. A G-type main sequence star, Admiral. Output is stable at 3.8 26 watts. Kane smiled. Let's borrow some of it. The fleet began to move, not towards the blockade, but away from it, out into the lonely darkness of the outer system. They were running, or so the hegemony would think. But they were not running from a fight. They were running to build the weapon that would end it. The timer showed 62 or 14:09. The board was set. The pieces were in motion. The great silent game for the soul of Viridia, and perhaps for the future of interstellar diplomacy, had truly begun. Hold fast, for the scales are about to tip. In a quiet corner of the Vanguard's mess hall, a young pilot stared into a cup of synthesized coffee. He had flown one of the drones for the mirror lattice. He hadn't fired a weapon, but his hand still shook from the adrenaline. He had been a part of the light that blinded an enemy fleet, a pinpoint in a constellation of defiance. He felt the low thrum of the ship's engines, changing pitch, the telltale sign of a major course correction. They were moving out fast. He didn't know where they were going, but he knew they were not retreating. Kane stood before the tactical plot, now displaying a schematic of his grand design. It was a web of drones, cargo pods, and even the decommissioned hull of a damaged science vessel, all designed to assemble in the shadow of the gas giant. They would create a colossal solar collector and focusing lens, a system-scale optical weapon. It was slow, ponderous, and utterly impossible to hide once assembled. And that was the point. Lyceum. The Proctor's broadcast channel, Kane said. Can you access it? Access is not the correct term, Admiral. It is an open channel designed for observation. We can listen. To transmit would require an authentication key we do not possess. But we could inject data into the stream, overload it with our own broadcast. Theoretically, it would be the equivalent of shouting in a library. It would be noticed and likely traced immediately. The consequences are unknown. They will learn our names, Good Kane said. When the time comes, I want a live feed from every external camera we have. I want them to see exactly what we are building. I want the executor and his hidden proctor to watch us construct the instrument of their education. Rostova's eyes were wide. Sir, we're showing them our entire hand. They'll know exactly what we're planning. They'll come for us. Let them come. Kane replied, his voice a low, resonant promise. The trap isn't the weapon, Commander. The trap is the choice they will have to make when we turn it on. He has surrounded the planet in a wall of steel. He thinks it's a prison. We will make it his witness box." The Vanguard fleet raced toward the swirling, majestic clouds of Kronos. The hegemony, confident in their suffocating blockade, noted the movement as a cowardly retreat, a footnote in their imminent victory. The countdown timer continued its relentless march. The universe was watching, and Admiral Valerius Kane was preparing to give it a show. The reckoning will be public. Deep in the asteroid belt, the Proctor's hidden observation post registered the Terran fleet's strange maneuver. The data was analyzed, the intent calculated. The Proctor, a being for whom entire civilizations were mere variables, in a grander equation, felt a flicker of something akin to interest. The Terran admiral was not following the expected script of panicked flight or suicidal defiance. He was changing the nature of the problem. This audit was becoming illustrative. A new directive was sent to Executor Vorlog's flagship, encrypted and absolute. It contained no new strategy, no HFY. It was simply a command to observe, to record, and to continue adhering to the doctrine of the ultimatum. The test was not yet over. Kane knew he was being watched. He could feel it a prickling on his skin like a static charge. Every move he made was a statement. Tomas. He was no longer just speaking to the executor. He was speaking to the unseen judge, and through them to the galaxy at large. He was composing an argument not in words, but in orbital mechanics and focused stellar energy. His fleet arrived in the shadow of Kronos, the immense gas giant eclipsing Viridia's star, and the construction began. Drones unfurled massive gossamer-thin sheets of reflective material. Cargo pods were blasted open, their contents assembled by robotic arms into a vast array. The damaged science vessel became the central anchor, its powerful sensor dish repurposed as a focusing emitter. It was a clunky, ugly, desperate creation, a testament to ingenuity, born of necessity. It was humanity's answer to a threat built on rigid, unthinking power. "We build, we do not break. Array construction at 40%. Admiral Carter reported, his voice strained with the effort of coordinating a dozen different teams. "We're burning through power cells at an alarming rate. We can build it, but we'll only have enough power to fire it once." "Once will be enough," Kane assured him. He looked at the timer. 48 Zara. 2 days left. "Eva, are they still ignoring us?" "The hegemony fleet remains locked in its shell formation around Viridia," she confirmed, pointing to the tactical display. "The Kythar ships were a red wound around the green jewel of the planet. They've registered our position, but they read us as a non-threat. They believe we have fled." "Their certainty is the fulcrum on which this will all turn," Kane said. "Lyceum, prepare the broadcast injection. On my mark, you will hijack the Proctor's channel. You will transmit our live feeds, our fleet designation, and a single repeating text message." "And the message, Admiral," the AI inquired. Kane looked at the screen at the image of his people working frantically in the shadow of a giant piecing together their defiant hope. He thought of the governor of the drawings in the bunker of the crew of the Starlight Wanderer. His voice was quiet, but it filled the bridge. "The message is, a choice is a mirror. What will you show us? Their doctrine faces a test." The hours bled into one another. The engineering crews worked without rest, their movements a frantic ballet of construction against the backdrop of Kronos' swirling storms. The superstructure of the solar lens, codenamed the Archimedes Array, took shape. It was a masterpiece of improvisation, a sprawling lattice of mirrors and power conduits nearly 100 kilometers wide. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. On the bridge, the tension was a physical force. They were exposed. If the hegemony chose to investigate, they could be annihilated long before the array was complete. Their survival depended entirely on the enemy's arrogance, on their unwavering belief that the battle was already won. The low hum of the ship's life support was the only sound a backdrop to the silent, frantic work being done outside. The cost of their earlier victory was being felt. The Steadfast was operating on auxiliary power, its main reactor shut down for repairs. The wounded were stable, but the ship's medical bay was stretched thin. Every member of the fleet was feeling the strain, the exhaustion, the gnawing fear that their gamble would fail. Yet they worked on. Then a change. Admiral Rostova called out, her voice sharp. "The hegemony fleet. A single ship is detaching from the blockade." Kane was at her side in an instant. "Which one? The Executor's flagship, the Indomitable Will. It's on an intercept course. He's coming to investigate. The king has left his castle." The bridge of the Vanguard was a tomb of silent tension. Every officer watched the amber icon of the Indomitable Will burn a hole in the tactical display. It was coming straight for them, a predator drawn by the scent of defiance. They were a flock of sheep building a scarecrow while the wolf closed in. "He will be in weapons range in 34 minutes. Eva Rostova reported, her voice as crisp and cold as the void outside. "The array will not be complete. Our destroyers are out of position to screen us. We are exposed, Admiral." Kane's gaze did not waver from the approaching threat. He saw not a ship, but a mindset. Vorlog was coming himself, because his doctrine demanded a personal, overwhelming response to impertinence. He expected Kane to be afraid. He expected him to be preparing for a futile, honorable last stand. "He is not coming for a fight," Commander Kane said calmly. The low vibration of the deck, a steadying presence. "He is coming for an inspection. He wants to see the nature of our folly before he passes judgment. We will give him something to look at. He thinks this is his stage, but he only knows half the play." Lyceum Kane ordered. "Take 10% of the completed mirror elements, the outermost ring. Reposition them. I want a welcome mat for our guest." "A kinetic shield," Carter asked, already modeling the energy requirements. "Sir, we don't have the power to sustain a barrier that could stop his main guns. Not a shield, Ben. A lens. A very weak one," Kane clarified. "When the Indomitable Will gets to precisely 10,000 kilometers, use the lens to focus a gentle stream of stellar particles onto his primary sensor array. Not enough to damage it, just enough to warm it up. Make his instruments fuzzy." Lyceum processed the command. "A calculated bit of electronic harassment, Admiral. It will force him to slow his approach and rely on secondary sensors, buying us an estimated 12 minutes of construction time. Executing. A dozen of the newly installed mirror panels silently reoriented, catching the faint solar wind and preparing to paint a target. They came to judge us. Let them first read the evidence. The Indomitable Will was a monument to Kithar, engineering a blade of a ship designed for intimidation and shock assaults. As it sliced through the darkness, a sudden unexpected wash of low-level radiation bloomed across its forward sensors. On its bridge, alarms chimed not with urgency, but with annoyance. Report Executor Vorlog hissed, his obsidian eyes narrowing. "Minor sensor interference." "Executor," his tactical officer reported. "Stellar particle fog. We are attempting to recalibrate. It appears to be a naturally occurring phenomenon, amplified by the gas giant's magnetosphere." Vorlog was suspicious. There were no coincidences in warfare. Slow to 1/4 impulse. "Extend auxiliary scanners. I will not be blinded by phenomena." His ship slowed its approach, now cautious, wary. He had been tricked by light once before. He would not allow it to happen again. That caution was exactly what Kane was counting on. The 12 minutes were on the clock. He's taken the bait, Sir Carter confirmed, a hint of relief in his voice. Construction is at 85%. Power conduits are being connected now. Open a ship-to-ship channel to the executor Kane commanded. Let's not be rude hosts. Vorlog's reptilian face materialized on the main screen, his expression a mask of contempt. Admiral Kane, your cowardice is predictable. Hiding behind a gas giant hoping we will simply grow tired and leave. Your time is running out. Time is a resource, executor like fuel or ammunition, Kane replied evenly. You've been spending yours reinforcing a cage. I have been spending mine building a key. Kane gestured subtly, and the external view on Vorlog's screen shifted to show a partial oblique angle of the Archimedes array, glinting in the starlight. You cannot cage an idea. Vorlog's eyes widened slightly, the first break in his composure. He was seeing the scale of it for the first time, the sprawling, impossible structure. What is this? Monstrosity, he demanded. It is a tool of clarification, Kane said. This entire conflict is based on your belief that power gives you the right to issue an ultimatum. I am offering you a different proposition, a choice, one that will be observed by all interested parties. The hegemony does not recognize choices from lesser species. We recognize only compliance or consequence, Vorlog snarled. The timer on the Vanguard's main screen read 30:27:11. That is the doctrine we are here to amend, Kane said. You have a fleet. We have a star. I am giving you the opportunity to withdraw your ships and end this peacefully. Settle the account with diplomacy, not destruction. Vorlog let out a grating laugh. You threaten me with a star? You are insignificant. Your fleet is a gnat. Your key is a child's toy. When your pathetic deadline expires, I will burn your colony, and then I will hunt you down and dismantle your ship, piece by piece. The offer stands, executor. The ledger is open. The choice is yours. Kane cut the transmission. The executor's face vanished, replaced by the steady, relentless march of the countdown. Their pride has signed a promissory note. We are here to collect. On Viridia, in a small apartment in the capital city, a historian named Alara Vance was watching the sky through her building's shielded observatory dome. She had been documenting the crisis, writing what she feared might be the last chapter of her people's history. For 2 days, the crimson lights of the hegemony blockade had been a constant, terrifying presence. But now something new had appeared, a faint silvery glint near the bright point of the gas giant Kronos. It was growing slowly, steadily. It looked like someone was weaving a spider's web in the heavens. It was the most beautiful and terrifying thing she had ever seen. Her son, no older than 7, pointed a small finger at the dome. Mama, is that the angels? He asked, his voice filled with a child's simple faith. Ilara pulled him close, her heart aching with a mixture of hope and fear. I don't know, my love, she whispered, her eyes fixed on the distant, impossible construction. But they are fighting for us. Back on the Vanguard, the final pieces clicked into place. Array construction complete. Carter announced, his voice hoarse with fatigue. All mirrors aligned. Power conduits are hot. Admiral, we're ready. The deck plates of the Vanguard hummed with a new and terrifying power. The energy drawn from the ship's own reserves to prime the array made the lights flicker for a moment. Every non-essential system on the fleet had gone dark, rerouting power to this one desperate gamble. Kane took a deep breath, the recycled air tasting of ozone and finality. He looked at Rostova. He looked at Carter. He saw his own resolve reflected in their determined eyes. Lyceum, hijack the Proctor's channel. Begin the broadcast. Eva, activate the Archimedes array. There is no escape from the light. In the asteroid belt, the Proctor's monitoring station registered a massive unauthorized data surge. The encrypted channel was suddenly flooded with live video feeds from the Terran fleet. The perspective from the Vanguard's bridge, the view of the colossal array, the cold tactical plot showing the hegemony's orbital prison. And with it, the repeating text. A choice is a mirror. What will you show us? The audit was no longer a private matter. The Archimedes array came to life. It did not fire a beam. It did not launch a projectile. It simply opened its eye. The 100-kilometer lattice of mirrors shifted its thousands of components, achieving a perfect parabolic focus. It gathered the light from Viridia's star, the gentle, life-giving photons that had nurtured a world, and focused it. It created a single coherent, impossibly bright beam of pure sunlight. This beam was not aimed at the indomitable will. It was not aimed at the hegemony fleet. It was aimed at a carefully calculated point in empty space just above Viridia's atmosphere. The beam itself was harmless, but it struck the upper layers of the planet's magnetic field and atmosphere, and there it bloomed. The empty space itself became a secondary lens, a new sun hanging directly over the planet. A star's fury focused to a razor's edge. The space occupied by the hegemony blockade was instantly saturated with an overwhelming torrent of energy. Not weapons-grade lasers, but something far more fundamental, heat and radiation amplified 1,000 times over. The cage has become a furnace. On the bridge of the indomitable Will Forlog, watched in stunned disbelief as his tactical plot went insane. The space his fleet occupied was suddenly the hottest place in the system. Alarm screamed across his bridge, a symphony of catastrophe. Report. He roared, his arrogance shattering like glass. Thermal radiation levels are critical, his officer shrieked, his composure gone. Hull temperature is rising past tolerance. Our heat sinks are overloaded. We are being cooked. Executor Kane watched the Kethar fleet on his own screen. The red icons were flashing, overlaid with brilliant yellow warning symbols for extreme temperature. He had not fired a single shot. He had simply changed the weather. He had turned their greatest strength, their tight, impenetrable blockade, into their most profound vulnerability. To maintain the ultimatum, they had to remain in orbit. But to remain in orbit was to be slowly, inexorably burned alive by the system's own star. Admiral Lyceum stated calmly, its voice cutting through the quiet awe on the Vanguard's bridge. "Executor Vorlog is hailing us. Put him on screen," Kane said. Vorlog's face was a nightmare of fury and desperation. The lights on his bridge were flashing red. Sweat beaded on his obsidian skin. Behind him, crew members were scrambling in panic. "What have you done, you primitive ape?" he screeched. "This is an abomination, a violation of all codes of warfare." "On the contrary, Executor," Kane replied, his voice a cold, hard line. "I have done nothing to you. I have simply created a choice. Your ships are overheating because of your proximity to the planet you threatened. Move away from Viridia, and the heat will dissipate. Your ultimatum will be broken. But your crews will live. Maintain your position, and you will enforce your doctrine at the cost of your entire fleet. The choice is yours. The universe is watching. The ledger demands a response." Vorlog stared, his mind unable to process the situation. His doctrine had no protocol for this. There was no enemy to shoot, no projectile to intercept. The enemy was the star itself, wielded by a human, who refused to fight by the rules. He had been offered a choice between his pride and his survival. "Hold your positions!" Vorlog bellowed to his fleet. "Do not let these Terran cowards break our will endure." It was the response Kane had expected. The response of a zealot, not a leader. He watched the hegemony ships suffer. The heat shimmer around their hulls was now visible, even at this range. Small fires were breaking out on the decks of several destroyers. Their own weapon ports were beginning to glow, not with charging energy, but with sheer raw heat. Sir Rostova said softly, "Their ships are beginning to fail. We are registering power fluctuations across their fleet. Life support systems are failing." This was the true test of Kane's own morality. He could hold the beam, let them burn, and end the hegemony's threat for good. It would be a victory, but it would be their kind of victory, a victory of annihilation. He looked at the timer. 24:10:05, Lyceum Kane said. "Isolate the fleet-wide command frequency for the Kethar. Bypass the executor. Broadcast this message directly to his ship captains. Your commander has chosen doctrine over survival. The Terran mandate does not seek your destruction. We seek a dialogue. Your lives are your own. The choice to live is yours." This is not vengeance. This is an intervention. The message went out. On the bridges of the hegemony ships, captains who were watching their crews suffocate and their vessels melt around them were given an alternative. One by one, then in a flood, the red icons began to move. A destroyer broke formation first, its captain choosing his crew over his commander's suicidal pride. Then another and another. The perfect shell of the blockade shattered into a panicked, desperate retreat. Vorlog watched his fleet abandon him. He watched his authority, his doctrine, his entire worldview dissolve into focused sunlight. He was alone, a king with no subjects, a zealot with no followers. With a final, inarticulate scream of rage, he gave the order for the indomitable will to withdraw. The blockade was broken. The ultimatum was void. Kane watched them run. He held the beam for 10 seconds more, a final emphatic statement. Then he gave the order. Eva shut it down. The Archimedes array, pushed far beyond its improvised design limits, could not handle the sudden power disconnect. With a final silent flash, the great mirror lattice fractured. Stress lines spiderwebbed across its surface before it broke apart into a million glittering shards of useless debris, a cloud of man-made asteroids tumbling in the shadow of a gas giant. The cost of victory. It had been a one-shot weapon, and its purpose was fulfilled. We have taught the lesson. The class is dismissed. The bridge of the Vanguard was silent for a long moment. The only sound was the gentle hiss of ventilation. Then Ben Carter let out a long, shaky breath. "My God, sir." It worked. A ripple of relieved, exhausted laughter spread through the crew. They had done it. They had faced down a superior force, a tyrannical doctrine, and won not by destroying them, but by forcing them to confront the bankruptcy of their own philosophy. Lyceum's voice broke the moment. "Admiral, the Proctor's channel has updated. A public entry has just been logged on the Galactic institutional ledger." All eyes turned to the main screen. The Proctor's audit was complete. The text was simple, written in the cold, impartial language of galactic law. Hegemony Doctrine. 7 Ultimatum of Imposed Harmony has been tested against a non-compliant, logic-driven opponent. Result: catastrophic doctrinal failure. The doctrine has been proven to be strategically unsound, promoting inflexibility that leads to self-inflicted tactical collapse. Privileges of enforcement associated with this doctrine are hereby rescinded pending review. a public tally of the Viridian engagement, is now a mandatory study for all hegemony command candidates. The precedent was set. The ultimatum was not just broken, it was academically and institutionally disgraced. Kane looked out at Viridia, no longer caged, shining freely in the light of its sun. He felt the exhaustion in his bones, the weight of the choices he had made. He had held to his moral line. He had shown mercy, but a mercy with teeth of iron and light. His arc was complete not from vengeance to justice, but from the restraint of a guardian to the righteous decisiveness of a teacher. The last fragment of the Archimedes array, a sliver of silver against the black, cooled to a dull pewter gray before tumbling away into the endless night. Kane turned to his crew, his voice low, but carrying the weight of their shared victory. They believed strength was the right to command obedience. They thought a demand backed by power was the end of any argument. We showed them that an ultimatum is not a statement, but a question. It asks, what are you willing to destroy to get what you want? We simply turned that question back on them, and they could not answer. Let the ledger show that humanity's strength is not in the orders we give, but in the choices we offer. A new balance has been struck.